in the arcade days, we used to make a game. Before it was done, we would take it to an arcade or bowling alley and test it. And we would like kind of hide in the back and just watch how people react. And I guarantee you, every single game that I've worked on during that era, within a half hour, somebody would find a bug that would crash the entire game. And was like,
with one quarter, beat the entire game.
And it's like, how did this happen? All this testing, and
well, that speaks to human creativity. That's what I think that's the beauty of human creativity. It's sloppy, unpredictable. And then would you say, and I would go further with that playing games, in this case, video games, really fosters creativity itself, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Just, when you're playing the game as is and you're free roaming and you're doing your thing, just the sheer traveling around in a video game is creativity.